This is the 20th story from the London Plus book called Paranoia. "Oh, Roberts, do put another log on the stove and take one of my cigars. Yes, those on the table there," the professor said. The long red curtains were drawn over the windows, and even another curtain covered the drawing-room door. It was quite cosy inside, though it was cold and foggy night outside in Putney. "And do take a hot port. Our Nancy's very good at making it piping hot," the professor continued. Soon we were sitting either side of the stove, and the ports and cigars in our hands. The professor has me over about once a month to give me the story of one of his cases. He does not like writing, but his memory is so good that sometimes he would repeat a story which I had written up for the paper quite a while ago. On rechecking the details he gave, they were always accurate. "Did I tell you about Brown?" "I can't remember, Professor, but I think not. I'm all ears." A plume of cigar smoke came from the professor as he settled back in his chair and paused before starting to talk. Brown was 32 years old. He was about 5 feet 10 inches tall and thin. His hair and beard were black and curly. He rarely made eye contact. It is difficult to know when I talked to him whether he had heard me or not. Sometimes I pretended to have forgotten what I was talking about, and usually he could give the gist. He was with us for about 10 months or so. I had ample time to study him. You have heard me talk of paranoia before. Brown was very suspicious. If he knew you were a doctor or nurse, he would try to avoid you. But because he did not look at people, he often failed to identify our staff. But direct questions made him anxious and suspicious and warned him that the questioner might be one of the staff. There are wooden chairs along the corridors connecting the mild dormitories, and the inmates who are not bedridden often sit there exercising. Sometimes Brown sat on one of those chairs and another of the inmates would join him. You, of course, know that the inmates don't talk very much, but they would to Brown, and he listened. I always do an exit interview for the inmates being discharged, and Brown began to be mentioned, sometimes enthusiastically, sometimes reluctantly, but quite often. They said things like, "You could tell him anything. He knows you're suffering and how to make it better. He makes you ready to face the outside. His hands are warm like his heart." So I talked to one of the nurses that I trusted to keep an eye on him. And there was precious little to report. Sitting chatting with people on the corridor does not sound important at all, and the nurses even noticed how little he spoke. He told me that occasionally Brown would take the inmates' hands. I asked for more, but really there wasn't that much more. I thought about Brown and wondered whether he could cure other more disturbed inmates. I say cure because indeed that appeared to be what he could do. And so the chief duty nurse, on my instructions, brought a back warder to the corridor to meet Brown. The chief then went for tea in the nurse's room, and they must have had the door closed because it was some time later that the chief heard cries from the corridor. He found a crowd of inmates surrounding Brown, who was on the floor in the corridor. The back warder was kneeling beside him. The professor took a mouthful of cigar smoke and dribbled it out of his mouth. Brown was dead. "Oh, bloody hell, surely not," I said. Yes, dead." "Oh my God, how shocking," I said. We were silent, but I could hear the professor breathing heavily, and at last he spoke again slowly. "It appears he was strangled. What a waste of such a man, and who was to blame?" "Professor, don't blame yourself. One tries to do the right thing, but often one is not in control of the results, I said. You must write up the story. I will, certainly. Can you, for the record, tell me Brown's Christian name? It was not in the admission papers, but there was an initial, J, and that's all the name I have. J. Brown.